Hello and welcome back after a long break from videos. This is a huge update video I've been meaning to do for over a year, and unfortunately life just kept getting in the way. When you last saw Bubbly and I, it was the end of an incredible 2017 season for us. Our first season after Bubbly joined the family in February of 2017. Once the snow hit that winter, we were no longer able to ride, and Bubbly was off for most of the winter. The start of 2018, I had such high hopes after everything we had achieved the year before. We overcame so many things, discovering Bubbly had ulcers, treating those, and ending with an incredible 3-day event where she blew me away with how well she did. It was a particularly nasty winter that winter, so when the snow finally started to clear and we were able to come back into work, it was the end of March. We brought her back very slowly, and even though she looked fine, there were times when she was very confusing. She bucked me off twice in one lesson at one point, which is pretty hard for her to do normally, as I've been told I have a pretty good sticking ability with all of her tantrums. But that day she was being particularly vicious. I started to get the feeling that maybe we were missing something, and something else was wrong. But she was never lame or off. Fast forward to April 12th of 2018. 2 days before the first clinic of the season, Bubbly started to show signs of being very slightly off. I canceled from that clinic and gave her a few days of rest. After that, she was definitely a bit better, but she was still very slightly off on her left front. You almost had to imagine it to see it. It was so slight. We were scheduled to go to a cross-country clinic that weekend, so better to be safe than sorry, I loaded Bubbly up and hauled her 3 towns over to the best lameness vet in the area, thinking she may have had sore soles, or her back could have been out, or maybe I was just imagining it and that I would get sent home with a sound horse. This is where the last 2-year wild ride that we have had begins. Upon a full workup, the vet agreed she was very slightly off but couldn't find the sort. This resulted in a nerve block of her hoof. With the nerve block on board, she was sound. X-rays followed, and the results shocked even him. She had what's called an avulsion fracture to her navicular bone. One thought process of how they come to be could have been because she did have underrun heels that we had been rehabbing since I purchased her. They definitely were not the worst that anyone had ever seen. She passed her vet check. No one really made too big of a deal about them because they weren't really that bad. And her angles had improved so much already with the corrective trimming we had been doing since I got her. However, it probably played a part somehow in the injury, as it does change the angle of the tendon to the hoof. From his description, the best way I can explain an avulsion fracture is when the tendon is pulling on the bone at an abnormal force and angle, which cause the bone to start to pull away at the attachment site and create an avulsion or a pulling fracture. I am not a vet, so do not take my word for it, but essentially my horse had fractured a bone in her hoof with almost no symptoms. We were out for the season for sure, and the vet had no firm prognosis as to whether Bubbly could heal at all. He told me that he would work with me and he would give her 6 months. If she was not better in 6 months, she would never get better. I was so heartbroken and devastated. I couldn't even imagine that this had happened. We had done so well at the end of last season, and she was so slightly off. I had no idea, and I could never have predicted that she had actually fractured a bone. My vet had recommended a wedge shoe to take the angle off the tendon, to lift up her heels and change the angle, and it would take the pressure off of the fractured area. I listened to him, and with the help of the best coach and trimmer ever, we did a ton of research. We had agreed to try to stay away from the metal shoe method, as it ultimately restricts movement and blood flow to the hoof, which is what Bubbly needed more than anything if she ever had a hope of trying to heal or regrow her hoof and proper hoof angles. The following months were full of many trims, hoof boots with wedge pads, glue-on boots with wedge pad, a Farrier's Formula supplement that I added to her diet to try to speed up hoof growth, and a lot of dollar signs. Bubbly was limited to a 50 by 50 foot pen, and she hated it. I tried my best to do every sort of enrichment or letting her graze in hand and minimal hand walking that she was allowed, but she was not happy or easy to control when I did have her with all of her pent-up energy. She broke and lost more hoof boots than I can count with the minimal frolicking that she could do in the space provided. It was a very scary and frustrating time, as hoof boots are definitely not cheap. Finally, I found a combination of hoof boots with power straps that worked the best and stayed on quite well. I got up the courage at the end of September to have my vet back out to do a recheck and see how she was healing. This is still one of the happiest days I can remember, when he deemed that she was sound with her boots and her wedges on. She had had a second-degree lameness to the left at the start of our journey, and that day he watched me lunge her and said she looked perfect. We made a new plan of being extra cautious, keeping the boots on with wedge pads for another 2 weeks just to be safe, and keeping her on a 4-week trim schedule the whole time. Then we would do no boots for another 2 weeks and look at her again in 4 weeks. If she was still sound, we would move ahead with a very, very slow return to work and rehab program. We ended up making a new temporary paddock as we were fighting with the fall mud at that point in time, and her boots would not stay on very well in the mud. We managed to keep them on for 2 more weeks and then followed the plan. November 5th, we had our first hand walk, and that led to a rehab starting with hand walks and gradually increasing the distance and the time. At the end of November, the pens froze and the mud became an issue. It froze so the ground was very lumpy, and I went away for a few days and Bubbly galloped around the frozen pen. When I came home, she was completely lame on almost every leg, but the worst, of course, on her front left fractured leg. Further investigation, we found she had completely bruised all 4 feet. On the plus side, though, her hoof growth had increased immensely since I had started her on the hoof supplement. However, this meant she was back in hoof boots for a while. This caused us to decide to push up a construction plan we had for their pens, and we redid them completely at the start of December, digging down and removing quite a few feet of mud and dirt before putting down sand and crushed rock, which some of you know will help increase stimulation to the hoof and cause it to grow quicker and be stronger. We were trying to rehab her hooves at the same time and change the hoof angle, which would severely lower the chance that she would ever be able to re-injure that area again. This set back the timeline of having our first under-saddle ride that I was hoping to do at Christmas that year, but I was just so incredibly happy that it wasn't something worse than bruised soles as I had originally thought when I saw how lame she was. At the end of December, I hauled in sand and I made her a stall rest area that was sandy and matted, and she was able to get out of the boots and have a nice supportive sandy area to help her soles thicken up. I was still using the hoof boots when I took her for her daily half-an-hour hand walks. July 19th, 2019 was my first ride back under saddle in 282 days, a lot of tears, 3 different paddocks with 3 different types of footing brought in, and a few setbacks along the way. I was back in my favorite place for a relaxing 15-minute walk around with lots of bending and flexion, and Bubbly was happy with it too. I kept up with her hand walks on days I didn't ride and slowly increased the amount of walking under saddle. Bubbly had a new thing of rolling in the snow on our walks. It was quite entertaining. January 26th, we worked in our first short set of trotting under saddle. Then the rehab was on its way. We had another particularly harsh winter that year, so the amount of time between rides was varying. I always managed to get her out for hand walks though, even in the negative 30 degrees Celsius weather. This was not the consistent rehab I had hoped or wanted for Bubbly though, so halfway through February my coach and I moved our thoroughbreds to a facility with an indoor arena for a month. It was incredible. I had never had access to an indoor before, and it definitely sped up the rehab process. Of course, after a few weeks into being at the indoor, Bubbly started doing this weird hopping thing in the trot, and it almost was constant at times. This caused a week of waiting for the vet to come back out while I basically just did hand walking. After the most comprehensive lameness analysis I have ever seen, involving me lunging Bubbly, my vet lunging Bubbly, and then him watching me ride her both directions in walk, trot, and canter, he deemed that there was absolutely nothing wrong with her. He thought that she was maybe bored of the arena or had some other reason she wasn't really wanting to work in the arena. I had probably subconsciously reacted to her hopping as well, but he said that she had not taken a single lame step since he arrived. He also cleared us to do canter work in our rehab, which we had not done yet. After that, we were able to progress so well. When I knew that the hopping was nothing to be worried about, it almost went completely away. She would only do it every so often when we were trying something new that she found hard or difficult, like trying to engage her core or lift her back and carry herself. We even progressed so far into our rehab that we got to do our very first jumps in the second last day at the indoor. I was on cloud 9, and was again so excited for our future after everything we had been through. Unfortunately, that was very short-lived. The very next day, during a nice and easy flat school before we were trailering home, Bubbly got into a mood and she ended up freaking out and bucking me off. Unfortunately, she was slightly off after that day, as well as giving me a gash in the elbow that was down to my bone that I had to have debrided the next day and dislocating my pinky finger. But honestly, I didn't care about that. I just cared that she had seemed to somehow have injured herself in the process. The first week back home brought about her back on track, quick wraps and rest. Trotting her out with my coach after a week, it was confirmed that she was still slightly dragging on her back right hind leg. She got more rest and walk after that, and around this time, my boyfriend actually bought his dream horse, a miniature horse named Nancy. This completed our little herd so everyone would have a buddy if anyone tried to leave for walks or other appointments, which made my life a whole lot easier. At the start of April, when Bubbly's gait had still not returned to normal after a couple weeks, I had the chiropractor out to see her and scheduled a vet check for April 16th. The vet looked at her and found that when she bucked me off a few weeks prior, she had actually somehow slightly strained her superficial flexor tendon. He said it was the best one to have if you were going to have an injury, and it was much better than if she had done the deep. He was not too worried about it and said they normally heal up very well. He told me to put her back on pen rest for 2 weeks and then bring her back into rehab slowly again if she was fine. May 1st, we checked her again and she was still slightly off when she was rounding corners in the trot. We decided to do a week of hand walking with 20 minutes of icing after, keeping her back on track wraps on at night. And this led to more frustrating hand walking as she was having all of her pent-up stall rest energy again. The amount I have learned in this journey about dealing with freakouts during in-hand and ground work, including rears and bucking circles, is more than I can say. I continued for longer than the week as I would feel Bubbly's leg and it would just still feel swollen to me, like very slightly swollen compared to the other one. But June 7th, my coach came and checked her out and said that it was barely noticeable. If she imagined she could maybe feel it, but I had probably been overthinking it. But I mean, listening to my journey right now, can you blame me for my paranoia? Anyways, this day we realized that Bubbly had also regrown almost an entire hoof since her initial diagnosis. And her angles of her hooves were so much better. At this point, we're over a year into our journey after her first initial diagnosis. I was appreciating all the little victories. At this point, I switched to a supplement that was good for her hooves as well as her tendons. We started to increase the amount of time hand walking and started her rehab again for the third time. Around June 28th, when we were getting close to maybe getting back on, Bubbly had her feet trimmed and somehow managed to make herself sore on all 4 hooves once more. It was like history was repeating itself. She had bruised all of her soles. Though they were much thicker than they had been, she must have went for a good gallop or trot or something around her pen and hit rocks, or who knows what she did, really. This horse doesn't surprise me anymore. But this led to 3 weeks of her hooves being sore and me only hand walking her in the arena, as well as going back to the mostly sand pen that I had had for her the first time around when we rehabbed her soles. July 21st, we put her glue-on shoes back on for the second time. Those literally lasted roughly 2 and 3 days before she had them off. However, we had almost completed the pasture fence, and August 5th, I was able to turn the horses out again on the nice dirt and grass pasture. They were so happy, and at this point, she had been cleared for pasture turnout. We were just waiting on her soles to rehab. The next week, I was able to get back on Bubbly to start rehab for what I hoped would be the last time. That lasted less than a week after she was very slightly off and dragging her right hind again after one particularly crazy day when she was galloping in the pasture. I was absolutely devastated, and I would have to say at this point, I was honestly the closest I had ever been to losing hope in this journey. I had given Bubbly 5+ months to rehab from something the vet said she would only need 2 weeks for. I had had so many setbacks that I had lost count, and I had spent so much of my savings and more on anything and everything I could possibly buy to try and assist her rehab and give her the best chance of healing. and I just felt so defeated with the ups and downs. At that point, I had decided to do pen rest again for a few weeks with all of her therapeutic wraps and things that I had bought her and icing, and then I just decided to give her the winter off and that we would reassess at the start of next season. She had all winter off to just be a horse and be in the pasture and do whatever she really needed to do. And she was galloping around with the mini horse most of the winter, which was actually, I think, probably pretty good rehab for herself and building up muscles. And I mean, we had the odd day where we would have family fun days where we would go with the mini for different events. And I would basically just walk Bubbly around in the ring while my boyfriend and the mini would do the little different things. So it was fun, and it was a good winter. Anyways, that brings us to the start of 2020. I don't want to jinx myself, but so far, we're so good. We brought her back into work super slowly again once all of the ice and snow had melted. Our first ride happened on the 22nd of February this year. We've done trails, we've used little tricks along the way to try to help her, one being to put a bell boot on the leg that you're rehabbing, so in her case it was her back right, and when you ride it actually brings more awareness and proprioception to that limb, and the idea is it's going to make it stronger, faster, and basically just give you a better chance of having a successful rehab. We've had the odd stone bruise, but even with the COVID virus delaying the start of the season, I have not really minded at all, as we have been able to go super slow through the rehab, and now we have even been able to do a few small jumps with only a few little freakouts here and there. I cannot believe that I'm able to ride now. I honestly, I can't believe it. It's just so normal after the last 2 years of not being able to be normal and not being able to do that and missing out on the things that we love to do together. And I have had so much time to spend with the horses, all of them, and it has made Bubbly and I's relationship so much better than it was at the beginning. But yeah, I'm just so excited to have her back doing the things she loves and I love, and be in a place where I honestly wasn't sure if we were ever going to be able to get back to again for a while there. But I'm going to end this video here because it's really long already. And hopefully I'll be able to post more as we are now able to do more things in the future. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening about our journey and where we've been the last few years and this huge update. But yeah, I feel so thankful to have such a great connection with my horse, and I just can't wait to see where the future takes us now. So anyone out there who is struggling with rehab or anything, I know the feeling, and sometimes it feels like you're absolutely defeated, but I mean, just keep on pushing, and sometimes it ends up great, and here's to hoping that we are now in for a great rest of our lives together. Anyways, thanks again for watching. Hopefully everyone is staying safe and healthy, and we'll see you next time. Bye.